Next, we have Mariama Morray, a sophomore double majoring in Spanish and Medicine, Science, and Humanities. For the past 2 years, Mariama has served as Sustainability Director of WINGS, a Hopkins student organization that advocates for menstrual equity. Today, Mariama is going to talk to us about the barrier that period stigma poses to sustainability and how we can make sustainable menstrual products accessible and normal.
Thank you. Let me share my screen. Okay. So if I'd asked my 10-year-old self how to be more sustainable, I probably would have listed, some things I'd commonly heard about composting or using reusable straws or like turning off the water when I brush my teeth. But right now, if you ask me, the first things that come to mind are about destigmatizing menstruation and using a menstrual cup or like cleaning a reusable pad, because sustainability is a way of life. And if we're not talking about all the areas of our life, we're not entirely tackling the idea of sustainability. So that we can use taboos, and I'll specifically be talking about menstruation, to uplift others and expel oppressive norms. And that way, to change statistics that disposable pads are 90% plastic. And disposable menstrual products contribute 200,000 tons of waste each year. But I found that it's not as simple as handing out a product to somebody and fixing the problem. Because according to a Think survey, 60% of women feel embarrassed when they menstruate, and 47% of US women have experienced period shame by men. So in the workshop that I do, I tackle more than just the mechanics of using these products, but also things like menstrual blood. Because one time when I was at like the student fair, and I was talking with, a young girl about a menstrual cup, and her face wrinkled in disgust when the topic of touching her own menstrual blood came up. And I could totally relate, because when I started using reusable menstrual products, it was so foreign to have to interact with my menstrual blood, because I'd been taught that, through all these different messages that, it's dirtier, it's nasty, and I shouldn't want anything to have to do with it. But with that conversation, I tried to do more than just talk about the product, but talk about how it's okay to be comfortable with your body, and that something like menstrual blood isn't dirtier, nastier, or something bad. And in being comfortable with our bodies, it's also talking about things like lubrication and masturbation, because when I started using menstrual products, I was too embarrassed to ask my parents to go out and buy me lube to start practicing, but practice is so important to using these products effectively. And so tricks that I tell people that I did myself was, after I would masturbate, I would just use my natural lubrication. And which is something that at first was nerve-wracking to say, but it opened up the space to talk about all these different topics. And not just getting comfortable with yourself and your body, but being accepting of all different kinds of bodies. Because if you think about the Think survey that I earlier quoted, they only reported these feelings among women. And in these topics of destigmatizing menstruation, the exclusion of non-binary and trans people is overwhelming. And that I've learned that instead of just using like just saying women, I use the word menstruator to help expand the way we think about where products should be and the way we viewed shared spaces. Because it's evident in the fact that the National Center for Trans Equality reports that 60% of trans people feel afraid to use the public restroom because of confrontation. And we can't ignore the effects of having little trash cans in individual stalls in order to provide privacy when it comes to using different menstrual products. But we also can't ignore having Kenny Jones, a trans man, the face of the period subscription service I'm on, because he's working to break the mold of how we talk about menstruation. And something that I also talk about is with the homeless population, because that's an area where we can't push for reusable products currently because of fears and the reality of, you know, health and infections. But that's not a reason to ignore this population. And it helps us look at the different ways that prevent the homeless population for using like reusable products as well. And in breaking these different molds, I think we can use taboos to break the molds that the sustainability movement has found itself in at times, and think on a much greater scale, because sustainability is the legacy that we leave behind. And more than just, you know, statistics, but also the ways we teach each other to care for each other, specifically. And when I was little, I always wanted to like get my period. I waited every holiday and every birthday and like hoped that this would be the day that I would get my period, because I felt like it was just something so exciting and that something big was gonna happen to me. And of course, I never got it on those days. I got it on some random day, January 6th. But as the years went on, I felt really stupid for being excited to get my period, because it felt like all that I had to do now, all that I had to worry about was my non-menstruating peers who could go through a test week and not having to worry about cramps or not having to worry about changing products or like finding creative ways to sneak a pad to the bathroom. But I think through doing my work with Wings, I feel like I would tell my younger self that you do have something to be excited for. You just don't specifically know what it is in the ways that you think that it is. Because now I would tell myself to be excited for the ability to be introduced to so many different communities of people, specifically doing workshops in Baltimore and being able to talk freely to like all of y'all about, you know, topics like period blood and masturbation, and being able to push myself to be more sustainable in all areas of my life, because I started with myself. And things like the National Period Day March on the first ever National Period Day as well. So, thank you.
Great, thank you, Mariama. If people can post their questions in the Q&A window, that would be great. We have one from Paul Ferraro. Do you think there are other contexts in which taboos/norms are constraints on behavior change for sustainability goals?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest maybe taboos or norms that we are delving into is definitely like the topics of like race and representation in the sustainability movement, and like how we teach sustainability. Because I think with my experience, when I first talked to I've been taught all my life to use like disposable menstrual products, but when I first talked to my mom about using a reusable pad, she was like, oh yeah, like that's what we used to do all the time, like that was normal. She's from Sierra Leone in West Africa. And so I think teaching, being conscious of like the backgrounds that people come from and how we are represented in the sustainability movement is becoming more of a norm, but there's still like some barriers that can face it today.
All right, and we have some other rolling in. Kylie Patterson says, what do you think about the price of cups? Seems like an initial upfront cost that slows people to adapt, similar to many sustainable products like a Hydro Flask.
Yeah, I think this is a really great point to bring up because this is something that I've been able to tackle as a sustainability director. Generally, menstrual cups cost around $30 upfront, and maybe like the cost of like a pack of pads or tampons would maybe be like $7 to $8. So one of the things that we've done in Wings that I've been able to work with my Evercup with is we buy the products wholesale and we sell them for about $8 to $10 to be able to make that more accessible. And I think as hopefully these products become more popular, we can develop like a lot of different ways to bring the cost down. But it definitely is a barrier when it comes to the upfront cost and who uses a menstrual product in general.
All right, and one last question. In terms of prioritizing personal actions that people take to reduce their impact, can you give us an idea of how much plastic people could reduce if they were to switch over to reusable products?
Yeah. So if you think about using like a menstrual cup, or I personally use like a menstrual cup in combination with reusable pads, and those can last you definitely like the year. And these kind of reusable products are projected to last you, typically like 5 years with proper like maintenance and care. So that's looking to like just by yourself hundreds of pounds of waste in that time span.
All right, thank you. And I'm going to pass it back over to Susanna.
Thank you, Irena. Since we do have a few minutes left, maybe I will just ask one more question from the chat window to Mariama, if she's still here.
Yes.
Which is, are these sustainable products for menstruation associated with any health risks?
That's also like a really good question as well, because one of the biggest things I talk about is maintenance of these products. Because as some people may know, toxic shock syndrome is like a challenge that somebody may have if they use like a tampon for a very long time. And we see that with like things like a menstrual cup, the instances of toxic shock syndrome are like incredibly like low compared to like a disposable tampon. But with health risk, a lot of things that come up are also like health conditions that people come into using a menstrual product using. So talking about like an imperfect hymen or vaginismus or like endometriosis, you have to be like very careful with the products that you use also as well. But generally with like proper care, there shouldn't be many health risks.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Mariama. So to conclude this session, then I just want to thank all of our speakers. I think, they give us a lot of interesting things to think about. And I just want to point out that, we heard from this vast array of different topics related to sustainability, but that really this represents only a small portion of the work that's being done across the schools of Hopkins in this area. And so, I'm thankful for the SLC Symposium committee for sort of allowing us to bring this together into one forum so we can really kind of see what other people are working on.